how do you personally judge whether like a 15% yield is attractive or maybe dangerous?
Firstly, I think that the yield opportunities are higher in DeFi. So what is a good yield? I think that's very subjective to different investors, right? Some investors are simply looking to earn anything higher than what the bank gives.
Yes.
Right. And the average bank deposit rate in most developed countries is less than 1%.
Yeah.
Right. But in DeFi, the risk-free rate, or what we call the lending rate for stable coins, is usually between 4 to 6%. And that usually mimics the Treasury bill or T-bill rate in the US. Right. So that is something that average investors will be able to get access to while paying minimal fees for getting those yields. Because otherwise, if you were to access those yield opportunities in traditional finance, you have to pay things like management fees. You have to pay things like performance fees for investing into a specific money market fund, for example. So that is something that DeFi offers, right? Access to yield opportunities while minimizing the cost involved, because a lot of this is operated again by permissionless smart contract code. So going back to the point about yield, 15%, is that a good number? I think it depends on the individual investor's risk appetite. And also you have to consider what is the risk that you're taking on in terms of the counterparty risk, right? Is this protocol trustable? What is the source of yield, right? Is this protocol generating yield from real world assets? For example, lending to businesses, private credit? Right? Or are they generating yield from simply printing more of their own tokens and giving it out to their own users, which in most cases may not be very sustainable, right? Because if people start selling the tokens, the token price might go down substantially, and the yield may not even matter very much. Right. So there has to be a balance of where the yield source, or what the yield source is, and where the yield comes from. And in most cases, if you don't know where the yield is, you are the yield as a user. Right. So you have to get educated on what the source of yield is and balance that with the risk associated to determine if it's a good yield. I generally think there are more yield opportunities in DeFi, firstly, because there are fewer participants, firstly. So there are more opportunities here. Right. And also there is a certain learning curve to DeFi in the first place. It takes a while for an average investor who's already knowledgeable about finance to also learn how to use things like wallets to interact with decentralized protocols, right? How staking works, how do you earn yield, how do you do things like lending and borrowing. So it takes a little bit of a learning curve.
So how to actually do this? If someone holds like a real world asset tokens, how can I use Pendle to invest? What does Pendle enable me to do?
Yeah, that's a good question. So on Pendle, we support real world asset tokens mainly in the form of stable coins, right? So that's been the main kind of assets that have been on Pendle. So it depends on the protocol, because not every single token is supported on Pendle, right? Most of the yield tokens supported on Pendle already have some amount of traction. They have significant TVL. So TVL stands for total value locked, right? So in most cases, these are protocols with, over 20 million in TVL, right? And you're able to take the stable coin that is issued by these protocols, which are also then invested in perhaps real world assets for them to generate the yield on the stable coin, right? Real world assets comprising of treasury bills in the US, perhaps money market funds, maybe private credit, lending to businesses. So there are different kind of yield sources, or even on-chain yield source, right? On-chain meaning you are generating yield from the DeFi space, right? Things like lending and borrowing. So they take the capital that people deposit for the stable coin and they do yield generating activities on-chain, right? So that those are some of the ways where people generate yield. So when it comes to real world asset tokens or stablecoins that are supported on Pendle, right, you are able to bring it to Pendle, and it basically what Pendle does is we split the yield bearing token into PT, principal token, and YT, yield token. Right. So you are now separating the yield portion from the principal. And the benefit of doing that, as I was saying earlier at the start, is that you're able to choose one side or the other. And for more risk conservative investors, they may not want to speculate on the variable yield. Maybe this stable coin could do anywhere between 10 to 15% yield, right? But perhaps I'm happy with locking in an 8% fixed rate, right? So PT allows you to lock in a fixed rate for a certain period of time on whatever asset. It could be the RWA real world asset token. It could be the yield bearing stable coin.
Okay.
Mm.
Okay. And like non-stable coins also?
Yeah, we don't just support stablecoins. We even have Ethereum, Bitcoin, and these are what we call liquid staking tokens or LSTs. So these are Ethereum and Bitcoin derivative tokens that generate an active yield from
Okay.
different protocols that have different ways of generating yield.